So pilgrimage is something we love. I did a little book called Backyard Pilgrim, but Julie will probably kick off the conference with talks about pilgrimage and looking at some baptismal fonts. Jules, do you want to talk a little bit about that first?
I love the first through fifth centuries, and I think they're so fascinating. And that's when pilgrimage is starting, like in the church itself, pilgrimage is kind of getting starting in the fourth century. So I've done a lot of research around what was changing, what was happening at the time that suddenly pilgrimage becomes very important to people. And what did they hope to get out of a pilgrimage? Like, why? If every place is holy, then why go on pilgrimage? So I love looking at theological assumptions that we have today that make other times in Christian history opaque to us. And so I really want to I'd like to introduce people to some of the exciting things happening in the early centuries that made pilgrimage possible, desirable, what we can stand back and maybe say, okay, that's interesting. That was great for their time. But there's other things that we can also look back and go, I'm missing that in my life. And maybe this practice adjusted for the 21st century is exactly what I need, because there was some deep theological thing happening at the time, and pilgrimage was a part of it. It was a reflection of it, and it also helped them move further in that theology. So I want to explore some of that without giving anything away. So I'm going to keep it a surprise. But also at the same time, this is when Constantine and the empire is starting to become a normal thing. We have incredible archaeological evidence as to how people were thinking about themselves. And it's not something you can really say, oh, in the fourth century, this is how a person thought about themselves. But through baptismal fonts, we actually have a really clear understanding of this is how Christians saw baptism. This is how they saw themselves, because the fonts are the biggest place where our identity is changed, confirmed, undergoes a transformation that we walk in for the rest of our lives. And there actually is a theological connection between baptism and the practice of pilgrimage, but there's also a deeply spiritual connection between those. So I want to explore that. Um, I I want to just talk about how those time periods can actually refresh our time period and give us different eyes to see some practices that were either that are normal for us now, like baptism, but we can see them with different eyes, as well as maybe begin to inhabit new practices that have deeply nurtured Christians for 16, 1700 years that we may have let go of. So that'll be a lot of the work I'm doing. Part of why I'm doing this work, well, maybe I don't, I'm not exactly sure how you have different strains that lead you down a certain path. I think I started thinking about pilgrimage about a decade ago and writing about it. But that, of course, led me to understanding the Camino. And so Matt and I have had a few wonderful experiences walking through some of the most traditional pilgrimage routes. There's tons of them. I mean, so many modern day roadways now follow ancient pilgrimage routes because became the giant highways through Europe because this was such a big deal. But we have walked some portions of some of those, and that's also been really meaningful for us as a couple.
And then I'll give my stuff away happily because I'll forget what I'm doing if I don't name it. um, Mine's a two-part pilgrimage into the water of your baptism, into the desert to be tempted. And it's also on identity, who we are, who God is. And in the waters of baptism, we become the beloved children of God. In the desert of temptation, that identity is put to the test. And we will come out of the desert trusting our Father in heaven or trusting the father of lies, who, to go back to that coin, wants us functioning by shame or pride. And I pray we can help people recover being children of God who are loved. So that'll be what I teach on, starting in Isaiah 30 and the call to repent and rest, and then landing in Matthew 4 with the baptism and temptation of Christ.